Welcome into the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, September 16th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 2-0 after beating the Denver Broncos 13-6 in week 2 of the 2024 NFL season at Mile High. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to react to Justin Fields' performance against the Broncos, break down the attempt at a right tackle rotation from the Steelers, and get into how good this Pittsburgh defense can really be. But first, we have to start with the second half of this one, specifically on the offensive side of the football. The entire conceit of the Pittsburgh Steelers roster is that of a run-first, physical, ball control football team. And through 2 weeks, they've been mostly incapable of doing that, especially in the second half in Denver. They went into the second half with a lead, a commanding lead, what felt like a commanding lead, because the Steelers were such a better team and have such a better roster than Denver, and yet they could never really snuff out the Bo Nix Broncos and their terrible offense, not because of the defense, but because of the lack of traction on offense. The Broncos in the second half, they came out and they loaded the box. They played single high safety. They added 6, 7, 8 defenders in the box, and the Steelers had no answers for it. Partially because they were unwilling to trust Justin Fields, and partially because they're not the physical run-first football team that they believe they are. At least they haven't shown that ability yet. In the game in week 2, the Steelers posted a 21% rushing success rate. And if you don't know what success rate is, it's one of the analytic nerd stats, but it's fairly simple. Basically, on first or second down, it says, do you get half the yardage to convert a first down? So if you run the ball on 1st and 10 for it to be considered a successful run, before it used to be gaining 4+ yards, but now when you factor in EPA and success rate has changed a little bit, EPA, expected points added, success rate has changed a little bit, it's gaining 5 yards. Basically just, do you gain 5 yards on first down with a run? And then on second down, if it is 2nd and 5, do you gain 2.5? And on 3rd and 4th down, to be considered a successful play, you got to get all of it. Whatever it is, you got to get a first down for that to be considered successful. And the Steelers had a 21% success rate on the ground in week 2 against Denver, a bad Denver defense, a Denver team that is allocating $83 million over the next 2 years to Russell Wilson and is in cap hell because of it. They couldn't out-physical the Broncos. In the second half, the Steelers gained 3 first downs, and 2 of those came courtesy of penalties. They only actually gained 1 real first down in the second half. For the game on the ground, they gained 3.9 yards per rush. Najee Harris finished with 69 yards on 17 attempts. Jaylen Warren was a little bit more involved than last week, 9 carries for 42 yards, 4.7 yards per attempt. That's the efficient Jaylen Warren we know, but he didn't get a lot of opportunities. Maybe that's because of the hamstring. We still don't really know how healthy Jaylen Warren actually is at this point. And okay, I'm willing to live with a reduced version of Warren, at least for right now. The Steelers are 2-0. So, all right, Justin Fields in the game, 8 for 27. That's 3.4 yards per carry. 16 of that, though, came on 1 scramble for a first down. So not very efficient from Fields, who should be part of that versatile rushing attack that should have taken over the game in the second half and was unable to. Cordero Patterson, 2 carries for 3 yards. And we need to see less and less of him in the run game. He's a kick returner, and that's it. If you look at the second half drives, I mentioned there were 7 of them. Starting the second half, 5-play drive, punt. Second drive, 3 and out, punt. Third drive, get the interception of Bo Nix in the end zone from Corey Trice. A great play from Corey Trice, who came off the bench, replacing Dante Jackson read Nick's well, dropped in zone coverage, made a play, and an interception. And you got to feel good for a second-year player who missed his whole first season in the NFL with a knee injury. So that was a great moment. And the defense will continue to provide the Steelers with great moments because it's a great defense. And what did the Steelers do? Well, they had a 4-play drive and kicked a field goal. And the only yardage that they really gained on that drive was from a 37-yard pass interference. And the Steelers and Justin Fields and George Pickens should be credited in some way for drawing that pass interference against Patrick Surtain. It was a great throw from Fields. He was good throwing the ball down the field yesterday. And Pickens made a good play on it, drew the flag. Okay, you get some credit for that, but that's one play. And you have to settle for a very long field goal from Chris Boswell in the thin air of Denver. So to recap, the first 3 drives, punt, field goal, and then 4 more drives in the second half, 3 and out, 5 plays, punt, 3 and out, punt. Nothing from this offense. It's not better than last year. And I'm getting closer to the point of feeling it may not matter who is the Steelers offensive coordinator because the order's coming from up top, from Mike Tomlin, to play the most conservative football you could possibly play. And the Steelers so far this season have a 62% run rate, which is the second highest in the NFL. Only the New Orleans Saints are higher, and the New Orleans Saints have 2 straight blowout wins. So that's why it's higher. That's the only reason. They're in positive game scripts constantly, and the Steelers have been in positive game scripts somewhat, but not nearly as much as the Saints, who are just blowing their opponents away through 2 weeks. So really the highest run rate in the NFL and an incredibly conservative style of offense. The 2023 Matt Canada Steelers offense that we all hated scored 17.9 points per game, gained 304.3 yards per game, threw for 186, and ran for 118 on the ground. Now, that's not only the Matt Canada offense, because at the end it was Sullivan and Mason Rudolph at quarterback, so it's not just picking in Canada, but it still wasn't a great offense late in the year. Through 2 weeks in 2024, 15.5 points a game, 260.5 yards per game, 121 through the air, and 139 on the ground. That's just not a way to win football games consistently. And that's how this team was built, to run the ball, to milk the clock out in the second half. And that didn't happen at all against a bad Denver team. That is a really bad Denver team. And it's a good thing it's a really bad Denver team, because the Steelers might not be 2-0. And it was a good thing for the Steelers that Kirk Cousins was a statue in week 1 because he came back too early from his Achilles injury, because if not, the Steelers might not be 2-0. So this is the second straight week coming off of a win that I don't feel good about things. I don't feel good at all about the state of the Steelers from what I watched. That second half was awful. And the first half was an improvement. It was better from the Steelers offense. It was better from Justin Fields. But when you completely stall out like that in a game script that you're planning on being in, you are built to be a team that can run the ball. And you didn't. Not even close. What can this team do on offense if not that? If the Steelers cannot take a 10-0 lead and extend it to 17-21 in the second half, or at least salt away the clock with 9 play, 10 play, 12 play, 15 play drives, ending in a field goal, touchdown, a punt, whatever, but taking 6 minutes off the clock, 8 minutes off the clock. If this team cannot do that against the Denver Broncos, what can it do on offense? The Steelers are 2-0, but should any decent AFC contender be remotely afraid of the Pittsburgh Steelers? I don't think so. Because I haven't seen any improvement from this offense, even with how different it's looked. And you can come back to me and say, well, there are some big plays being wiped away from penalties. And I'll talk about Justin Fields' performance a little bit more later when I want to dive into that. And yes, that's true. The Steelers had a touchdown taken off the board because of an offensive pass interference call on Van Jefferson on what was a pick play, really. I mean, that was the design of it, right? It may not have been that blatant of a pick. It was a well-designed play from Arthur Smith, and George Pickens caught it, ran it in the end zone, or mostly dove and extended it into the end zone. That's taken off the board. Good call, bad call. It doesn't really matter. That stuff happens. Justin Fields rolls out of the pocket to the right, 51-yard bomb. Absolute rope to George Pickens. An excellent throw. The type of throw that the Bears saw out of Fields when he was at Ohio State that made him the 11th overall pick. And that gets wiped off from a Broderick Jones holding call. Bad, right? The stat line for Fields, which was 13 for 20 for 117 yards and a touchdown, looks a hell of a lot better if you add 51 more yards to that. Right? We're looking at 168 yards passing, 14 for 21. Still doesn't look great. And again, those things happen. If those plays getting taken off the board completely stalls your offense and you have no other answers, you're so reliant on a couple of explosives or on one well-designed pick play to get into the end zone because you can't just either smash it down Denver's throat in the red zone or matriculate the ball down the field with the multiple drop back passes from Fields or well-designed runs. If you're so reliant on those plays that a couple of penalties completely throws you out of whack and you only score 13 points, then you're not a good offense. Not at all. And the Steelers aren't a good offense. And I'm even with a really, really good defense, because I loved what I saw from the Steelers defense yesterday. Really, when Denver started moving the ball, it was because they were desperate and it was a kitchen sink situation. They had the throwback to Bo Nix that, got Minkah Fitzpatrick sucked down on a trick play and hit a long pass to Josh Reynolds. They took advantage of Beanie Bishop a little bit. He's clearly the weakness of this defense, but there aren't many weaknesses of this defense. It looked really good. The pass rush looked good again. TJ Watt, Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith. They were great. They were disruptive. Bo Nix looked uncomfortable. And Bo Nix is probably going to look uncomfortable for his entire short NFL career because he's just not a very good quarterback. But even with that defense, it's hard to say this is a good football team because a football team built to play with a lead, built to rely on its great defense, can't go 7 drives in the second half, produce 3 points and 62 yards of offense, and only gain 3 first downs with 2 of them aided by penalties. That's not a team that's a playoff contender. That's not a team that's capable of winning games in the playoffs. I started to feel that way near the end of the preseason about the Steelers, and I have seen nothing to change my mind with Justin Fields as the quarterback of this offense, with Arthur Smith as the play caller. And I doubt I'll see anything that changes my mind even once Russell Wilson, it feels like, inevitably gets healthy and gets onto the field, because it seems like the Steelers don't really trust Justin Fields. And I'll get into that as well. But before I get into that, I want to get into this with you, because even though I'm down on the Steelers, even though I'm not feeling great about a 2-0 start, the Steelers first place in the AFC North, I'm not feeling great about that. It is still the greatest time of the year. Again, football is back and it's here to stay till February. Over 1 million fans across 33 states got in the game last year by making picks on Underdog Fantasy. So make sure you go and check out Underdog Fantasy. I've been checking it out this weekend. I got into the game with Underdog Fantasy. signed up. It was really easy to sign up. It's a really intuitive app. You just make some picks, higher or lower, your favorite players, look at some stats in the weekly pick 'em. It's a lot of fun. We enjoy watching football because we love football, but when you have another way to enjoy football even more, you got to take advantage of that because it makes Sundays that much more fun. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward and signing up is even easier. Just head over to Underdog's simple to use mobile app or underdogfantasy.com. Sign up with the promo code STILLCURTAIN. That's STILLCURTAIN. And Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code STILLCURTAIN, to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. Must be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply, void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-369-8783 or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. That's Underdog Fantasy. And now back to Mike Tomlin and his fantasy that the Steelers are a Super Bowl contender. I have had a problem with the way the Steelers operate as a franchise for like a while. And I still feel the same way. And the two things that illustrate that most clearly for me through the start of the 2024 season are the Broderick Jones situation and how Justin Fields has been handled. So let's start with Broderick Jones, because Troy Fautanu, the Steelers' first-round pick last spring, finally got healthy after suffering an injury in training camp in the preseason. So Fautanu returned to the field and started at right tackle yesterday. I'm happy with that. You got to start your first-round picks. You got to put your good young players out on the field. And Broderick Jones, instead of moving over to left tackle and taking Dan Moore Jr.'s spot, went to the bench. The Steelers decided to go with a rotation at right tackle. Broderick Jones rotated in after Fautanu started, and he ended up only playing 11 snaps because in those 11 snaps, he was called for 3 penalties, including that holding that negated Fields' best throw of the day, the 51-yarder to George Pickens, and allowed a pressure in that very short time. Fautanu played the rest of the game, 55 snaps. Dan Moore Jr. on the other side, 1 pressure, 1 penalty. He's playing the best of the 3 tackles. Broderick Jones was not put in a position to succeed. I would just say a rotation on the offensive line is insanity. That is banana lands. And I have no idea how an NFL head coach comes to the conclusion that a rotation at right tackle is the right way to handle your last 2 first-round picks. Now, people have been saying, when other reporters, when media, when myself say the Steelers' handling of Broderick Jones has been ridiculous and flawed and a disaster. A lot of people have countered and said, what if Broderick Jones just isn't good? And I'm open to that. I'm open to that possibility. In a vacuum, I love a head coach that is willing to play the best player regardless of draft position, regardless of investment. I think that gets you a lot of buy-in from a locker room, right? And it just gets your best players onto the field. I think there are a lot of front offices and head coaches that will make poor decisions to justify their prior mistakes, to justify their first round picks. Teams will stick with highly drafted players for way too long to make it look like the right decision. The Steelers have proven they're not that type of organization. And in a vacuum, I love that, because that is how an organization from the top down, you create a winning culture, a culture of competition. You have to earn that spot, right? That's what Mike Tomlin's thinking when he sees Dan Moore Jr. and Broderick Jones battling for the left tackle spot, and Dan Moore Jr. playing better in training camp, in preseason, and now playing better in the regular season. That's all well and good in a vacuum. That's all well and good if you're a team that is contending to win playoff games, to win Super Bowls. That's not where the Steelers are as an organization. So you need to find out if your investment in Broderick Jones was a worthwhile one. You traded up in the first round to go get him. And Bill Belichick, to spite the Jets, gave you that pick for only a third overall, or a third rounder, or a fourth rounder. He let you move up cheap because he wanted the Steelers to get in front of the Jets. And that's great. It made it less of an investment, but still a giant one. And now all you've done in his 2 years is play him out of position, move him back and forth between two different positions, and now rotate him in after this year's first round pick started over him. There are too many teams that stick with highly drafted players for too long because they want to justify the pick. That's not what playing Broderick Jones would be. We don't even know if he's good. We've never seen him play his real position. The Steelers have never given him a chance to develop or play his natural position. Tomlin has wasted a first rounder, because I'm almost to the point where I'm going to say that Broderick Jones is probably never going to be a good player for the Pittsburgh Steelers because of how they handled his development. Maybe not solely because of that. Maybe Broderick Jones was too raw coming out of Georgia. Maybe Broderick Jones doesn't have the work ethic. I don't want to put that on a guy because I don't know that. I don't know him like that. I don't know his work habits. But there are plenty of reasons why players don't work out. But the Steelers have not given him a good chance to work out. If the Steelers were a Super Bowl contender, the way they're operating is the right way to operate. You play the best player right now. Everything must be earned. But if you look around the AFC, the Steelers don't have a quarterback. They aren't a Super Bowl contender. You cannot beat Mahomes. You cannot beat Allen with defense and ball control, especially if ball control isn't even something that you can rely on, because they didn't control the ball against the Broncos. They didn't turn it over, but a 3-and-out and a punt, you might as well have. The Steelers should be in an evaluation and development period on the offensive side of the ball. But Tomlin refuses to do that, partly because the defense is so great and is championship caliber, partly because the schedule is a nightmare in the second half, so they have to make their hay early in the year, and partly because he's just stubborn. The Steelers need to know what they have in Fautanu and Jones. That is important. Knowing what you have in a first-round pick is important to an organization. It helps you evaluate the people making the picks. It helps you evaluate those players. It helps you maximize the selections that you did make. And you made them for a reason, so you might as well believe in them. And there's this thought of like, oh, well, Broderick Jones had to show up in training camp and earn that starting spot. Yeah, but also he earned it by being a first-round pick. That's earning it too. You were a first-round pick for a reason. The team believed in you for a reason. Why do you have to earn it again if he goes out there and plays poorly in his proper position? Then okay. Bench him. Cut ties. Admit you were wrong and move on. But we haven't even given him a chance to do that. We haven't even seen him in that situation. The Steelers should be developing young players. They should be giving them a chance to succeed or to fail. Because the difference between winning against Denver and losing against Denver is not the difference between, because maybe Jones goes out there starting at left tackle and plays horribly, and it throws the whole game plan off, and the Steelers lose somehow. Okay, you're not going to win the Super Bowl anyways, so at least you learn something. And the same goes for Justin Fields. Going 2-0 with your backup quarterback on short notice while employing a conservative defense first approach and keeping the ball out of harm's way is excellent when you're waiting on a franchise quarterback to come back and you expect to contend for AFC championship games and contend for the Super Bowl. Doing that when you don't know what you have at the position is useless. We know nothing more about Justin Fields now than we did when they traded for the guy. And with an opportunity for him to start that arose from a Russell Wilson injury and 2 winnable games early in the season against not great defenses, to leave that without learning about your quarterback is malpractice from Mike Tomlin. Jones and Fields haven't had chances to succeed, or in Fields' case, really to fail. They haven't asked him to do anything. So you don't know what he can do. And it resulted in a 2-0 start for a team that has a pretty low ceiling. I'd rather know if Fields is hitting some throws in the Arthur Smith offense, if that connection is jiving together, right? If you let him drop back more than 20 times, and really it's not even dropping back 20 times because a lot of those are screens and they're quick throws and they're getting it out of his hands really quickly, then you know what you have, or at least you get a better idea of what you have, because Justin Fields isn't under contract after this year. Neither is Russell Wilson, because you don't believe in those guys long term. So find out what they are, and then you can decide whether to believe in them long term or not to. Mike Tomlin, this is a trend with him. This is how he operated with Kenny Pickett. He threw him into the second half of a game against the Jets with the Bills on the schedule next, 2 good defenses and very good teams, because there was a locker room dispute at halftime and he was frustrated with how Mitch Trubisky was playing. So you do that to your first round pick, your quarterback you believe is the face of the franchise. Whatever we thought about Kenny Pickett, whatever we saw from Kenny Pickett, taking him in the first round means that they believe he could be the face of the franchise. And you just throw him out there haphazardly, that's malpractice. And Tomlin did that because he was so desperate to beat the Jets early in the season on a team that had no chance of winning the Super Bowl. That's meaningless. In the grand scheme of you're trying to win the Super Bowl, winning or losing that game against the Jets meant nothing. Protecting your investment in your quarterback and protecting his confidence and allowing him to enter the right situation and build up some confidence in the NFL, that's valuable. And now, Justin Fields, who's been a starter for 3 years in the NFL, you don't have to protect him in that way, but they're being overly protective of him in the way they're calling the game. And that is a flawed way to operate, because you don't have him for 4 years. You didn't just draft him. Throw him to the Wolves. See if you have something. If not, you're not tied into him. It was a late round pick of a trade anyways. Then you can cut ties and we can draft somebody next year. We can sign somebody next year. We can start the process again, because all that matters is finding a quarterback who can win a Super Bowl. The Steelers do not have one. So learn what you do have. Mike Tomlin operates the way a coach with a contender should, but he has no awareness of the greater landscape in the conference. He coaches like he's constantly, not only he operates like he has a contender, but on game day, he coaches like he's on the hot seat and needs 9 wins to save his job. When in reality, he has more job security than any coach in any of the major sports. Even Bill Belichick got fired. Mike Tomlin's not getting fired. Steelers organization will not fire Mike Tomlin. He could win 4 games this year. He will not get fired. That's not how they operate. They fetishize consistency and organizational continuity. And for some reason, over 17 years, Mike Tomlin hasn't figured that out. It doesn't make any sense. He refuses to use the job security he has as to his advantage. Because you can take a few losses on the chin, but you develop a quarterback, you develop an offense, you find out what you have in a quarterback. And then eventually, maybe Justin Fields is talented enough to contend with a Mahomes, an Allen, a Burrow, a Lamar Jackson. These are the guys you have to beat, not Bo Nix. Maybe by throwing him to the Wolves, or by learning about him, or by protecting your first round left tackle and building up his confidence and putting him in the right position to succeed, you could build up a real contender on offense, or at least find out if you have the pieces to. Maybe Justin Fields isn't very good. Maybe Broderick Jones isn't very good. And maybe that's why the Steelers aren't trusting them, right? Maybe they already internally feel like they have their answer. But that to give up on a guy so quickly after you believed in him and you made an investment in them in the first round of the NFL draft, and with Justin Fields, that's not the investment. But with Broderick Jones, that makes no sense. You're setting him up to fail. And Mike Tomlin continues to do this with highly drafted players because he doesn't know how to develop talent. He's never proven an ability to do that. He's never developed a quarterback. He's coached 17 years in Pittsburgh, been the head coach. He's never developed a quarterback. He had been. And there have been some nice stories on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like Mike Hilton comes to mind, right? You get him as an undrafted guy and he excels. And there are plenty of nice developmental stories, but at the cornerstone positions, we haven't seen it. And he continues to operate in this way that is detrimental to important players' development, or at least detrimental to his staff learning about the important players that they have. And I just don't understand it. It continues to baffle me, the way that the Steelers operate. And everyone can be excited about 2-0. You can be excited about 2-0. I'm happy that the Steelers are 2-0, but when you're beating the Broncos 13-6, that doesn't do a lot for me. Because I don't see the sign of a team that can actually contend against good teams that are going to play in the second half of the season. I'd rather find out if you have that or not right now than being so overly protective of the football and running the ball 62% of the time. And you can't even do that well. So I leave week 2 even more discouraged than I was after week 1, and the Steelers haven't lost yet. So I just talked about him a lot, but let's go even more into Broderick Jones. Fautanu is better, so he should play. Broderick Jones is still really raw. We knew coming out of Georgia that he was really raw. That's kind of one of the reasons that they took him. It's because he was this raw athletic prospect, and you could hopefully mold him into an all-world left tackle. But Jones isn't going to get a chance to develop unless Moore or Fautanu get hurt and continues to be forced to learn both positions. Rotations on the offensive line make no sense. So yes, Broderick Jones was terrible yesterday. Yes, he may not be a good player right now. Even factoring in his injury to his elbow, like maybe that's affecting him, maybe it's not. Regardless, he may not be a good player right now, but they're just putting him in awful positions to succeed. And another reason a rotation on the offensive line makes no sense, the most important thing to an offensive line is that they're cohesive, right? They have to pass off rushers from the tackle to the guard to the tackle. They have to be ready for stunts. You got to know whose responsibility is what. And you got to know there's little intricacies of like when they bump up next to each other and know how to pass somebody off. And in the run game, how to execute a double team and get to the next level. When you have more time on task with the same guy next to you, you're just going to get better. And that's the reason in each of the last 2 seasons, the Steelers' offensive line has continued to get better throughout the year because they've happened to be like really healthy and just have good injury luck. So they've developed into a fairly good, especially a run game offensive line by the end of the season because they're cohesive, not because of the talent. So you're now sacrificing that for a guy you don't even think is good enough to play over Dan Moore Jr. So it it doesn't make sense from a development standpoint for Broderick Jones. It also doesn't make sense from a like having success in the game and if beating Denver is your number one priority, it doesn't even make sense from that standpoint. Jones was put in an awful spot, an impossible spot, really. And he failed. And he looked even worse than he probably should have. Maybe the Steelers have written him off as a potential starter. That seems possible. And I'm starting to get to the point where I wonder if he'll ever be an impactful player in Pittsburgh. I still think he's talented enough, and we see flashes in the run game, especially of him being dominant, of being a good offensive tackle in the NFL. But at some point, the relationship fractures. You don't think the coaching staff believes in you, and you got to go somewhere else. And we're 2 weeks into the season, and from the way they've handled it, we're getting pretty close to that. 2 weeks into his second year, after a promising first year, playing the wrong position. It's not a good situation on the Steelers' offensive line. That's a lot of negative. And I've just hammered you for 35 minutes with my worries about this team and their lack of understanding of where they are as a team, right? Let's hit something good for a second and give out an award. This will be my game ball instead of the petty game ball that Mike Tomlin gave to Russell Wilson, because if you didn't hear, Russell Wilson, for not playing, got a game ball in Denver to go along with the $83 million that the Broncos are paying him, because the Steelers said, some version of he got a raw deal in Denver, and maybe he did, but getting paid $83 million not to work somewhere doesn't sound like a raw deal to me. It sounds like you were probably pretty bad at your job. And that's what the Broncos thought of Russell Wilson. So the game ball that I'll give out goes to Darnell Washington. I did not expect him to be this useful of a player in year 2. When I went to training camp, one of my observations was that he did not look comfortable in the pass game at all. And he looked pretty comfortable catching that fade in the red zone. This was your idea of him when you draft him in the 4th round, even with some injury concerns at Georgia, right? You think of a guy that's that big. He'll be a threat in the red zone. If they put a safety on him, he has no shot. And he's like an extra offensive lineman. And Arthur Smith has seemed to love using him, especially against Denver. I thought he was excellent in the run game. I thought he was really good as a blocker. And that's good enough, right? If Darnell Washington is just an excellent blocker who is essentially a glorified 6 offensive lineman in heavy personnel, but can run a couple routes, so you have to respect it somewhat, that's a useful player. But if you give me a fade to catch Justin Fields' first touchdown pass of the year, back shoulder, front corner of the end zone, that's pretty good stuff. That is not what I expected to see from Darnell Washington. I am very pleasantly surprised with him, and he'll get my non-petty game ball in week 2. Russell Wilson got the very, very petty game ball from the Steelers, which I like. You got to rub it in their face a little bit. You weren't able to rub it in Denver's face playing Russell Wilson. And, with what I think of Russell Wilson, I don't know how well that would have gone. But you get to rub it in their face after. It's almost better, right? He was hurt, but we still beat you. And your replacement for Russell Wilson didn't look good at all. So rubbing it in Sean Payton's face like that is a good thing, and has to feel pretty good for Wilson, even if he didn't get out there, and has to feel pretty good for the Steelers. So that takes us to really the most important topic for the Steelers, right? The most important topic for the Pittsburgh Steelers is who is going to be the quarterback. And it seems with the way that the Steelers are handling Justin Fields, that the second Russell Wilson is healthy enough to go, he's going to go. He's going to be the starter. He was signed to be the starter. They brought him in with that intention. And he got injured. And it seems like they still have that intention. So why do I say that? Because they don't trust Justin Fields to do anything. There were some really good deep balls that I'm encouraged by. Right? That is exciting. There was the 16-yard scramble. That was exciting because it could have been a sack. With a lot of quarterbacks, it is a sack. That's what I've talked about all offseason, why he's valuable. Turn that into a 16-yard gain. Potential 5-yard, 8-yard loss, 16-yard gain. But they didn't really use Fields that aggressively in the design run game. And through 2 weeks, Fields average air yards to the sticks. So basically, when you need a first down, how short of a first down are you throwing it? Because it, in a lot of ways, shows the aggressiveness of the quarterback and the trust of the play caller. And he's at negative 3.2, one of the worst in the NFL. Now, Patrick Mahomes is down there with him. That's a different situation because teams are so terrified of Patrick Mahomes beating them deep. He just has to take the underneath stuff, right? That is not the situation with Justin Fields. They're loading up boxes, and we're seeing him hit a couple of deep shots. But in most cases, it's a lot of underneath stuff. It's a lot, right? Get the ball out of your hand to the perimeter. Don't throw it in the dangerous high traffic areas over the middle, which is good when you have a backup quarterback in. And that's what they view Justin Fields as, not as a potential future starter. And I don't view him as a potential great future starter, but possibly a bridge. And the Steelers don't seem to think that. Justin Fields, though, has been accurate. 3.6% completion over expectation, right? So he's expected to complete this many passes. He's been better than that by 3.6%. That's ninth best in the NFL. As a team, the Steelers, Justin Fields is the only one attempting passes. So he's at a 5.6 yard average depth of target. But in terms of ranking all of the teams, most haven't gone to backup quarterbacks, but it's just easier to look at it that way. The Steelers have the 5th lowest average depth of target, down around the Commanders with Jaden Daniels, a rookie starter, down around the Giants with Daniel Jones, who is not going to be a starter for much longer, judging by how it's gone. And like I said, a 62% run rate, which is the second highest in the NFL. They just don't seem to trust Justin Fields at all. The offensive playbook is so siloed to the run, and they're not even getting the explosives off of it very much. They're not getting explosives in the run game, and they're not getting explosives off the deep play action shots, the over the middle stuff where you pull the linebackers down, you hit it behind them, right? That's the idea of the Arthur Smith offense. At least it was in Tennessee and it was in Atlanta. It doesn't look that way in Pittsburgh. And maybe that's because they don't believe in Justin Fields. And that's why I wanted Justin Fields to start. I think Justin Fields is better and a more useful quarterback than Russell Wilson. I'm almost to the point where when Wilson's healthy, okay, just let me see it. Are you going to trust him? Are you going to open this thing up? Is it because you don't believe in Fields? Or is this how you operate as an offense? Is this what Mike Tomlin wants Arthur Smith to be doing? I at least am now curious in what that looks like. And I did not think I'd get to that point 2 weeks in. And it's not even about Russell or about Justin Fields' performance. Because I think he's been fine. I think he's hit the deep shots. I think he's used his legs. He's been effective as a scrambler. He's actually not taken very many sacks. In week 2, he was pressured 15 times, and he only took 2 sacks. That's a really good pressure to sack ratio, which is one of his biggest issues throughout the first 3 years of his NFL career. He's handling pressure like pretty well. Against pressure so far this year, 7.8 yards per attempt, which is better than when he's kept clean. Versus the blitz, 10 for 16 for 72 yards and a touchdown, a 3.5 average depth of target. So he's just getting it out quickly, which seems to be what the Steelers want him to do. Get the ball out of your hands. That's usually good for a lot of quarterbacks, except when your quarterback is potentially the best athlete on the field. You kind of want the ball in his hands sometimes. But he's avoided mistakes that way. He's been okay. But when it's a question of Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, I'm not leaning that Russell Wilson is better. I'm interested to see what it's going to look like. And I really didn't think I would get to that point because I find in a lot of ways, from a personality perspective and a leadership perspective, Russell Wilson to be rather insufferable. And I find him to be a pretty washed up quarterback who relied so heavily on his creation ability with his legs. And I don't believe that's still there. But at least show me, are you willing to trust a quarterback? Are you willing to open things up and throw over the middle of the field? That's not something Wilson's good at, though. So I just don't know what we're going to learn about the Steelers offense this year. And I'm already exasperated with it through 2 weeks that they won. They've won both weeks. And I feel this way. And I should not feel this way. But I do. I don't feel good about it. I don't feel good coming on here and being so negative after they won 2 games. I'm just not going to lie to you. There are a lot of people that will lie to you and say, 1-2 games, the point is to go out there and win. Justin Fields is doing his job. He's protecting the ball. Why would you throw over the middle of the field? Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons are there in week 1. That's what I heard a ton. Because you can create explosive plays in the middle of the field. Because you have to see if your quarterback can do that. Because you're not going to win the Super Bowl. So at least learn what you got. So hopefully I'm not going to continue to be this negative throughout the season because the defense is awesome. The defense is really good. And you can win a lot of games with a defense like that. I don't know what you can do with this quarterback situation and with this type of conservative game planning. And then that comes to, was I wrong about not wanting Brandon Ayuk? I don't think I was wrong about it because I still don't think the quarterback situation is good enough. So you add Brandon Ayuk to this. What does it look like? Probably a lot of the same. Probably a lot of quick passing game. Probably a lot of, probably 62% run. But the Steelers have a really big problem at wide receiver too. Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin are doing cardio out there. That's all it is. Van Jefferson, 0.45 yards per route run. In week 1, he ran the most routes on the team. 0.45 yards per route run. Calvin Austin, even worse at 0.3. They're just non-factors. Van Jefferson drew a pass interference. That was helpful. He wasn't particularly open. It was a great throw from Justin Fields. We saw quite a few good throws from Justin Fields. Van Jefferson in the game, 2 for 14. Calvin Austin, 1 for 6. Pat Freiermuth, though, he's basically your wide receiver too. That's what I expected. He had 4 catches, led the team with 4 catches for 39 yards. That's because George Pickens had the touchdown wiped off the board. He had the 51-yarder wiped off the board. One of his other big plays was another pass interference that he drew. I think Pickens was great. I think Pickens was really, really good. I think he can be a functional wide receiver 1. And I think they're still getting him targets. Like I'm not concerned about teams are giving him so much attention he can't get open. He's getting open. He was getting open against Patrick Surtain. He'll continue to get open because he's a really good receiver. I've been encouraged with what I've seen from George Pickens. Wide receiver 2 is a massive hole. But if Brandon Ayuk is on this team, I'm not sure I feel any different about this team's prospects to win a playoff game and to win a Super Bowl. And that brings us to looking ahead, right? Because week 2's over. The Steelers are 2-0. Steelers are in first place in the division. The Ravens and the Bengals are both 0-2. And the Ravens lost to the Raiders. Gardner Minshew led a comeback. Brock Bowers was really great for the Raiders. The Raiders are coming up on the Steelers' schedule. And that'll be a common opponent that we can at least judge something by, because the Steelers don't play a divisional opponent until week 11. But in week 3, it'll be the Chargers. That's a test. The Chargers are 2-0. Jim Harbaugh has that team playing really physical football. J.K. Dobbins looks like, well, he just looks healthy, first of all. But he also looks like a great running back, much better than he was when he was playing for John Harbaugh in Baltimore. He's been really effective for the Chargers. That's what the Steelers are going to face next week. And we'll start to actually learn something about this team because, again, in week 1, they played a statue at quarterback, and that was a non-functional offense. In week 2, they played Bo Nix, who was running a non-functional offense and does not look comfortable in the NFL yet, and a team that's paying Russell Wilson $83 million over the next 2 years, so they don't have cap space to get better. The Chargers, it's not the best roster in the NFL, but it's Justin Herbert, who I think is a really good quarterback. And it's Jim Harbaugh, who's one of the better coaches in football, NFL or college, one of the better coaches in football. They're coming to Acrisure Stadium, 1 p.m. kickoff. And I am very, very interested to see what either the Justin Fields, it'll probably be Justin Fields with Russell Wilson's calf injury still lingering, or the Russell Wilson offense looks like against a team that they probably have to score points against. Steelers didn't have to score points against Atlanta and against Denver. And their defense is good enough that if you look further on the schedule, right, at Indianapolis in week 4, I don't know if the Steelers are going to need to score a ton of points in that game. The Colts just lost to the Malik Willis-led Green Bay Packers because Anthony Richardson, while there's great highlights, it's not particularly functional. Then Dallas in week 5, okay, that gets tougher. At the Raiders in week 6, that gets tougher. Aaron Rodgers and the Jets in week 7. So we're going to start learning about this team, but I'm just desperate to see what it looks like against better competition because I'm worried that it doesn't look very good. And that's why I was so negative today. And I'm hopefully going to be in a better mood going forward. Hopefully we see some more promising things from the Steelers offense, but it is a big problem right now. And to me, it starts with Mike Tomlin. It goes all the way to the top. Steelers are 2-0. Steelers leading the AFC North. The Steelers play the Chargers next week, and I'll be with you next week, next Monday, to react to the game, to hopefully be in a better mood, to break it all down, to talk Justin Fields, to talk Arthur Smith, to talk the Steelers defense against Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert. Until then, have a good week and go Steelers. This has been the Steel Curtain Podcast. Please like and subscribe because we really appreciate the support, especially on YouTube. That would be huge. Have a good week. Go Steelers.